police chases are already unpredictable by nature, but one incident in Los Angeles showed just how quickly they can turn from tense to fatal in a matter of seconds. It began as a fairly typical pursuit, followed from above by news helicopters, with viewers watching live as officers tracked a white van moving through the city. As the chase continued onto the 110 freeway, the driver showed no intention of stopping. He pushed through traffic, extending the pursuit while multiple police units followed behind. From above, everything looked controlled in the way these situations often do on television, with cameras maintaining a steady view and anchors calmly narrating what seemed like a routine police pursuit. The chase had started earlier that evening around 8:30 p.m. in downtown Los Angeles, when the driver of a stolen van refused to pull over for police. After roughly half an hour, the van began to slow as it approached the Mount Washington area. At first, it looked like the situation might be coming to an end, but instead of surrendering, the suspect made a sudden decision that immediately escalated the danger. While the vehicle was still moving, he climbed out through the driver's side window. As he dropped down, he lost his balance and slammed into the center divider, appearing disoriented, but still attempting to escape. Without pausing, he climbed over the barrier separating the lanes and stepped directly into oncoming traffic. Within seconds, the situation turned catastrophic. A vehicle traveling at highway speed struck him head-on before he had any real chance to react. The moment was captured live, as the helicopter camera had zoomed in just before the impact, making it impossible for viewers to look away. Back in the studio, the tone shifted instantly. The anchors, who had been calmly describing the pursuit moments earlier, were visibly shaken as they realized what had just happened.
Whoa, whoa, whoa,
Wow.
Oh my God! Oh no! Oh!
What had seemed like a routine police chase had turned into a fatal incident in an instant, unfolding live with no warning. Emergency responders arrived quickly, but the suspect, later described as a man in his 30s, was pronounced dead at the scene. Authorities confirmed that the van had been stolen, and a dog found inside the vehicle was later removed by animal control. What makes the footage especially unsettling is how quickly everything changed. One moment, it looked like a standard pursuit that would end in an arrest. The next, it became a fatal collision broadcast in real time, showing just how unpredictable these situations can be once they spiral out of control. And that takes us from a pursuit that spiraled out of control in seconds to a game where everything seemed routine until one moment changed everything. On the night of October 28, 2023, the arena in Sheffield, England was filled with thousands of spectators, with over 8,000 fans packed into the stands to watch a highly anticipated elite ice hockey league matchup between the Nottingham Panthers and the Sheffield Steelers. The energy in the building felt completely normal, the kind of atmosphere you would expect from a competitive game being played in front of a large crowd, and with the match also being broadcast live, there were viewers watching from far beyond the arena itself. The game began without anything unusual. Both teams played aggressively but carefully, and the first period ended without a single goal being scored, leaving everything still wide open. As the match continued into the second period, however, the pace began to shift. The Steelers managed to break through, gradually building momentum and taking control of the scoreboard, eventually pushing ahead and putting pressure on Nottingham to respond if they wanted any chance of turning the game around. It was during this stretch of the game that Adam Johnson, one of Nottingham's key players, gained possession of the puck and began moving forward into the offensive zone. From the outside, it looked like a routine play developing, the kind that happens countless times in a single game, with players weaving around each other and trying to create an opening. But in the span of just a few seconds, everything changed. As Johnson advanced, a separate collision occurred nearby involving Matt Petgrave. During that contact, Petgrave lost his balance in an awkward way, and as he fell, His body lifted slightly off the ice while one of his legs extended outward. It was an uncontrolled, split-second movement, but in that exact moment, the blade of his skate made contact with Johnson's neck. Hockey skates are designed to be extremely sharp, refined to a thin edge that allows players to move efficiently across the ice. But that same sharpness means that even brief contact can cause serious injury. In this case, the contact resulted in a severe cut, and almost immediately it became clear that this was far more serious than anything typically seen during a game. Players around them reacted instantly, signaling for help as Johnson collapsed onto the ice. The atmosphere inside the arena shifted from excitement to shock in a matter of moments, as both teammates and opponents realized what had just happened. Medical staff rushed out as quickly as possible, attempting to control the bleeding while the crowd looked on in silence, unsure of what they were witnessing. The game was stopped, and Johnson was quickly taken off the ice and transported to a nearby hospital, where doctors attempted emergency surgery. Despite those efforts, the injury was too severe, and he tragically passed away later that night. In the aftermath, the incident sparked widespread attention and concern across the hockey world. Petgrave was initially arrested as part of the investigation, but authorities later confirmed that there was no evidence of intent, and the incident was officially ruled a tragic accident. Even so, the impact of what happened did not end there. In response, governing bodies in the UK moved to make neck guards mandatory equipment, something that had previously only been recommended. It was a change driven by the recognition that while hockey is an inherently fast and physical sport, certain risks could still be reduced. And what makes the entire situation so difficult to process is how ordinary it seemed just moments before. A routine play, a standard game, and a normal night of competition suddenly turning into one of the most devastating incidents the sport has ever seen. It was something that shocked an entire arena. But the next one is unsettling for a different reason, because it happened almost unnoticed until it was too late. Niagara Falls is often described as one of the most beautiful natural landmarks in the world, drawing millions of visitors each year who come to witness the sheer power and scale of the water as it crashes over the edge. From a distance, it can seem almost peaceful, the constant flow creating a kind of rhythm that feels predictable and controlled. But the reality beneath that surface is very different. On May 30th, 1985, during a live television broadcast, that contrast became impossible to ignore. A reporter was filming a segment near the falls, focusing on something entirely unrelated, when something unexpected appeared in the background of the shot. At first, it wasn't immediately clear what viewers were seeing. A man had somehow ended up in the water above the falls, caught in the current that moves relentlessly toward the edge. There was no pause, no moment where he could regain control. The force of the water dictated everything, pulling him closer and closer to the drop. As the camera continued rolling, the situation unfolded in real time. The man was carried toward the brink with nothing to hold onto and no realistic way to escape. Within seconds, he disappeared over the edge, falling more than 170 feet into the turbulent water below. While there have been rare cases of people surviving a fall over Niagara Falls, those instances are extremely uncommon and often involve unusual circumstances. For most, the combination of the impact, the force of the water, and the environment below makes survival nearly impossible. The man was later identified as Robert Overacker, and investigators determined that his actions were intentional. Over the years, thousands of people have lost their lives at Niagara Falls, with a mix of accidents and deliberate acts contributing to that number. The conditions themselves are unforgiving. The water near the edge can move at speeds exceeding 60 miles per hour, making it nearly impossible to swim against or even stay afloat once caught in it. And even if someone were to survive the initial fall, the powerful currents, the swirling water, and the jagged rocks at the base create an environment where escape is incredibly unlikely. What makes this particular moment so unsettling is that it wasn't discovered after the fact or pieced together through reports. It happened live in the background of a broadcast, turning what was supposed to be a normal segment into a real-time glimpse of how dangerous that environment truly is. It's clear that nature can be unforgiving, but sometimes the danger comes from something much closer and far more human. On December 9th, 1977, during a game between the Houston Rockets and the Los Angeles Lakers at the Forum, what began as a routine on-court altercation escalated into one of the most violent incidents in NBA history. Tensions had been building throughout the game, and late in the fourth quarter, a scuffle broke out near the basket between players from both teams. As the situation escalated, Rockets player Rudy Tomjanovich ran across the court, reportedly trying to break up the fight and restore order. But as he approached, Lakers forward Kermit Washington turned suddenly and threw a single punch with full force. The punch landed directly on Tomjanovich's face. The impact was devastating. His body went limp almost instantly, and he collapsed to the floor, hitting it hard. Players froze as the seriousness of the situation became immediately clear. Tomjanovich lay motionless before eventually regaining some awareness and being helped off the court. At first, the severity of his injuries wasn't fully understood, but once he reached the hospital, doctors discovered the true extent of the damage. The punch had caused multiple skull fractures, facial injuries, and a traumatic brain injury so severe that it was later compared to the force of being thrown from a car traveling at high speed. Tomjanovich himself later described tasting something unusual immediately after the hit, which turned out to be spinal fluid leaking due to the fractures in his skull. He nearly died from his injuries. Washington was ejected from the game and later received a 60-day suspension, one of the harshest penalties in NBA history at the time. He also lost tens of thousands of dollars in salary and faced intense backlash from the public, including death threats. The incident deeply affected both players' lives. Washington struggled with the psychological fallout and was never viewed the same way again, while Tomjanovich spent months recovering before eventually returning to basketball and later becoming a championship-winning coach. The incident led to significant changes in the NBA, including stricter penalties for fighting and increased officiating oversight. It remains one of the most infamous moments in sports history, not just because of the violence, but because of how quickly it happened and how close it came to being fatal. Sometimes the chaos happens first, and the explanation comes later. But in this text case, the explanation came almost immediately. On the evening of November 19, 2014, firefighters in Rockville, Maryland, responded to a rapidly escalating house fire that had already consumed most of a two-story home by the time they arrived. Flames were tearing through the structure, thick smoke pouring into the night sky, and the intensity of the blaze made it clear this was not something that would be contained quickly. Crews worked for over an hour to bring it under control, battling collapsing sections of the building as the house was reduced to little more than a charred frame. At that stage, the focus would normally shift toward figuring out what caused the fire. Investigators typically consider everything from electrical faults to accidental ignition sources, slowly piecing together what went wrong. But in this case, that process was interrupted in a way no one on scene expected. As local media covered the aftermath live, one of the residents approached a reporter without hesitation. That man was 27-year-old Carlos Peralta, and instead of expressing shock or confusion, he calmly made a statement that immediately changed the direction of the entire investigation. According to him, the fire wasn't accidental at all. He claimed it was arson, and more disturbingly, that he was the one responsible.
Me, I set it on fire.
Given the sheer strangeness of this unsolicited confession, the reporter didn't believe him at first, assuming it might be confusion or even some kind of misunderstanding. But Peralta didn't back down or correct himself. Instead, he continued speaking, offering additional details about how he had started the fire, describing it in a way that made it harder to dismiss as anything other than real.
Just poured gasoline on the floor, set it on fire, and went to buy a drink and came back.
Minutes later, he walked directly over to police officers standing nearby and repeated the same confession, this time without the filter of a camera or a reporter in between. At that point, officers had no choice but to take him seriously. Almost immediately, physical evidence began to support what he was saying. His clothes carried a strong smell of gasoline, and when officers searched him, they found a lighter in his pocket. Combined with the level of detail in his admission, it was enough to place him under arrest on the spot. What made the situation even more confusing was his explanation for why he did it. Peralta claimed that he had set the fire intentionally to draw attention to what he described as poor and unsafe living conditions inside the home. According to him, this was a way to force people to notice problems that had otherwise been ignored. But that reasoning raised more questions than answers, because destroying the very place he was trying to expose didn't follow any clear logic, especially considering that other people, including his own family, were still living there. As investigators looked deeper into his background, a clearer picture began to emerge. Peralta had reportedly been dealing with schizophrenia, along with ongoing struggles related to alcohol abuse. Just 2 weeks prior to the fire, he had already been arrested for property destruction, suggesting a pattern of unstable behavior leading up to the incident. What initially sounded like a calculated act began to look more like the actions of someone in the middle of a serious mental health crisis, convinced that what he was doing made sense. The fire caused an estimated $400,000 in damage, leaving the home nearly destroyed. Despite how quickly the flames spread, all 5 other residents, including his own mother, managed to escape without injury. And that's what makes this case so unsettling. Because while most investigations begin with a mystery, this one had the answer delivered almost immediately by the person responsible, standing in front of a live camera. The case was disturbing because of intent. The next one, however, is just as shocking, but this time it was a complete accident. The rematch between Anderson Silva and Chris Weidman at UFC 168 was one of the most anticipated fights of 2013, a high-stakes showdown held at the packed MGM Grand Garden Arena in Las Vegas. Silva, widely regarded as one of the greatest fighters in MMA history, was attempting to reclaim his middleweight title after losing it to Weidman months earlier. The fight carried enormous pressure, and everything about it felt like it could become a defining moment in the sport. The first round was competitive, with both fighters trading strikes and testing each other's range. But early in the second round, just over a minute in, everything changed in a way no one could have predicted. Silva stepped forward and threw a powerful low kick aimed at Weidman's leg, something he had done countless times throughout his career. But this time, Weidman reacted perfectly, lifting his knee to check the kick. The impact didn't land the way Silva expected. Instead of connecting cleanly, the force of the kick rebounded directly back into Silva's own shin. Instantly, his lower leg snapped. The break was so severe that his leg bent in a way that was visibly unnatural, folding beneath him as his body continued moving forward. He collapsed immediately, clutching his leg and screaming in pain as the arena fell into stunned silence. The referee waved off the fight without hesitation, awarding Weidman the victory as medical staff rushed into the octagon. Replays quickly began circulating, showing the moment from multiple angles, each one just as shocking as the last. Meanwhile, Silva remained on the canvas, clearly in agony, as doctors worked to stabilize his leg before carefully placing him on a stretcher and rushing him out of the arena. At the hospital, surgeons confirmed that Silva had suffered fractures to both his tibia and fibula. To repair the damage, they inserted an 11.5 millimeter titanium rod into his leg to stabilize the bones. As horrific as the injury looked, doctors later explained that it could have been even worse. The bone had not pierced through the skin, which meant Silva avoided a compound fracture, something that could have introduced serious infection risks and potentially caused long-term complications involving blood vessels and surrounding tissue. Recovery was expected to take several months, but the reality proved far more difficult. Silva later described how he avoided even looking at his injured leg for days after surgery, struggling mentally as much as physically. The pain, especially at night, was intense, and the rehabilitation process required him to relearn basic movements like walking. Even after healing, he admitted he was constantly afraid the leg might break again. Despite all of that, Silva returned to professional fighting just over a year later, continuing his career into his 40s. What happened at UFC 168 remains one of the most shocking and unforgettable injuries in combat sports history, not just because of how severe it was, but because it showed how quickly a routine move can go wrong. The next story takes that same idea and raises the stakes even higher. The FIA Formula 2 race at Brands Hatch on July 19, 2009 was supposed to be another step forward for one of motorsport's most promising young talents. 18-year-old Henry Surtees, the son of Formula One world champion John Surtees, was competing in the second race of the weekend when tragedy struck in a way that no one could have anticipated. During the race, another driver, Jack Clark, lost control of his car and crashed into the barrier. The impact caused one of the car's wheels, weighing around 64 pounds, to detach and bounce back onto the track at high speed. Seconds later, as Surtees approached the same section at roughly 100 miles per hour, the loose wheel struck him directly on the side of his helmet. The impact was immediate and devastating, knocking him unconscious instantly. With no control over the vehicle, Surtees' car veered off the track and crashed into the barriers. The engine continued revving as the car came to a stop, signaling that something had gone terribly wrong. Race officials immediately red-flagged the event as marshals and medical teams rushed to the scene. Surtees was carefully extracted from the car and taken to the circuit's medical center before being airlifted to the Royal London Hospital. Despite the rapid response, the injuries he sustained from the initial impact were catastrophic. Later that day, he was pronounced dead. The cause of death was determined to be the head injury from the wheel strike, not the secondary crash. In the aftermath, his family made the decision to donate his organs, a choice that ultimately saved 5 lives. The incident sent shockwaves through the motorsport world, highlighting a previously underestimated risk. As a direct result, safety measures were improved, including stronger wheel tether systems designed to prevent wheels from detaching during crashes. The tragedy of Henry Surtees remains one of the most sobering reminders of how even with advanced safety systems, motorsport can still carry unpredictable dangers. And that also becomes clear in this next moment, although this was in a much more calm setting. On October 3, 2007, renowned Indian writer, critic, and academic M.N. Vijayan was addressing reporters during a live press conference in Thrissur, Kerala. At 77 years old, Vijayan was a respected intellectual figure, known for his contributions to literature and political commentary. That day, he appeared composed as he spoke, answering questions and sharing his thoughts with the press. Partway through his remarks, however, something began to feel off. Mid-sentence, he paused and asked for water, a small but noticeable interruption. Someone nearby handed him a glass, and he took a sip before attempting to continue. For a brief moment, it seemed like nothing more than a minor lapse. But almost immediately after, his condition worsened. His speech faltered, and within seconds, he collapsed backward in his chair. His eyes rolled back, his mouth hung open, and it became clear he was struggling to breathe. The room erupted into confusion as journalists and attendees rushed toward him, unsure of what had just happened. The cameras continued recording as people tried to help, capturing the chaotic response in real time. Vijayan was quickly transported to the Amala Institute of Medical Sciences, where doctors attempted to revive him. Despite their efforts, he was pronounced dead later that same day. The cause was determined to be a massive heart attack. In the aftermath, it was revealed that Vijayan had been experiencing ongoing health issues, including persistent headaches, a recent fever, and known heart problems. Some individuals who had seen him earlier that day noted that he didn't appear well, but he had chosen to attend the press conference regardless. His death sent shockwaves through India's literary and academic communities, where he had been a prominent voice for decades. What made the moment especially unsettling was that his final moments had been captured on camera, turning what should have been a routine press event into a sudden and tragic ending. And that takes us from a quiet collapse in front of cameras to a moment where thousands watched a career end in an instant. On November 18, 1985, during a Monday Night Football game between the Washington Redskins and the New York Giants, one of the most shocking moments in NFL history unfolded in front of a national television audience. The game itself had been competitive, but midway through, a single play would become permanently etched into sports history. Quarterback Joe Theismann lined up for what appeared to be a trick play. He handed the ball off to his running back, who then pitched it back to him, giving Theismann time to scan the field for a pass. As he stepped forward, focusing downfield, he didn't see Giants linebacker Lawrence Taylor charging toward him from behind. Taylor hit him with full force, wrapping him up and driving him to the ground. As they fell, Theismann's right leg became trapped awkwardly beneath the weight of the tackle. In that instant, both bones in his lower leg snapped. The break was so violent that it produced two distinct popping sounds, audible even over the broadcast. The injury was catastrophic. His leg bent unnaturally, and the bone broke through the skin, creating a gruesome scene that immediately silenced the stadium. Players from both teams froze, unsure how to react. Taylor himself stood up and began frantically waving for medical personnel, clearly shaken by what had just happened. At first, some players misinterpreted his reaction, thinking he might be celebrating, but it quickly became clear he was urgently trying to get help. Medics rushed onto the field and spent several minutes stabilizing Theismann before carefully placing him on a stretcher and transporting him off the field. At the hospital, doctors confirmed that both the tibia and fibula had been severely fractured. The injury was so serious that it effectively ended Theismann's career. He never played another down in the NFL. Despite the severity of the incident, Theismann never blamed Taylor. Over the years, the two maintained mutual respect, often speaking publicly about the moment without any animosity. The play itself has since been voted one of the most shocking moments in NFL history, not just because of the injury, but because of how quickly a routine play turned into a career-ending tragedy. Now, that was all for today, folks. If you enjoyed these horrifying clips, click to see more on the video on screen.